And so many Canadians served in uniform in Afghanistan. 158 Canadians gave their lives, and more than 40,000 members of the Canadian Armed Forces served. And the blood, the treasure, the time that Canada invested in Afghanistan has established a special bond, a special commitment that we have with that country, felt particularly deeply by those who did serve, but felt in some sense by all of us who have seen the sacrifices, who have known people that have participated in those sacrifices. Now, this House has rightly just passed Bill C-41, a bill that will enable development assistance to get into Afghanistan, creates an authorization regime whereby that can happen. And I think passing that bill was the right decision to create that framework whereby that development assistance can be delivered. But we should be clear at the same time in our denunciation of any kind of normalization of the Taliban, any kind of recognition of legitimacy of their control over Afghanistan, and we should be firm and clear in our commitment to the fact that Afghanistan, the Afghan people, deserve freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. This is the birthright, I believe, of all people, and Canada has particularly been engaged with and sacrificed for the people of Afghanistan, and we need to hold on to and be steadfast in committing to the principle that Afghans in particular deserve the protection of these fundamental rights. So we reject any kind of normalization or recognition of the Taliban, and we believe that it's important to engage with pro-democracy opposition groups with the goal of restoring freedom, democracy, and fundamental human rights for the people of Afghanistan. So the motion that Conservatives brought to the committee and that was unanimously adopted by the committee says that the committee report to the House that it firmly denounces the Taliban and rejects any recognition or legitimization of their control over Afghan territory. In particular, the committee denounces the Taliban system of gender discrimination, systemic violence targeting minority communities, reprisals against former members of the Afghan National Security and Defense Forces, attacks on freedom of the press, and other violations of human rights. The committee believes the Taliban must remain a listed terrorist organization. Now, I think just parenthetically, I want to mention to the House that there are a number of cases of terrorist listing where this government has been behind on. We are at about the 5-year anniversary of this House adopting my motion calling on the government to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. At the time, the government actually voted for that motion to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. That was 5 years ago, and at the time the government said it's being studied, it's being considered, etc., and they still have not listed the IRGC as a terrorist organization in spite of the escalation in horrific violence from the Iranian regime. Conservatives have also called for the listing of the Wagner Group as a terrorist organization. There was a unanimous consent motion in the House a number of months ago. It hasn't been 5 years like with the IRGC, but it's still been a number of months. The Wagner Group is involved in the genocidal invasion of Ukraine from the Putin regime. The Wagner Group is also active in parts of Africa. They've been active in Syria, using horrific, violent tactics, complete disregard for civilian life, and acting as an agent of the Putin regime's foreign policy. So we have called for the listing of the IRGC. The House has called for the listing of the IRGC. We've called for the listing of the Wagner Group. The House has called for the listing of the Wagner Group. And these are two organizations, terrorist groups in our view, that have not been listed as terrorist entities under the criminal code. The Taliban is listed, and we, through this motion, are highlighting the importance of the Taliban remaining listed. When you list an organization under the criminal code, it's not merely symbolic, of course. It's very significant. It's a way of most clearly denouncing these groups and also shutting down any possibility for them to operate in Canada. It means that when an organization is a terrorist group, they can't recruit here, they can't be present here, they can't fundraise here, and in the absence of terrorist listing, groups have more room to maneuver. This is why we think it's important to shut down these groups in Canada. But I want to return now to talking specifically about the Taliban and about Afghanistan, because after the September 11th attacks in the United States, there was a global coalition that came together recognizing that Afghanistan had become a haven from which terrorist attacks could be organized, but also recognizing the way that the Afghan people were victims of ongoing horrific violence, and we could detail those violations of human rights then and now. We've seen horrific targeting of ethnic and religious minorities, Christians, the Shia Muslim community, the Hazara community has faced multiple ongoing genocides. The Sikh and Hindu community in Afghanistan that I've advocated for, and other members have advocated for in behalf of other minorities and all Afghans, particularly the situation of women in Afghanistan. Many have started to use this terminology, and I think it's quite correct to say that there's a system of gender apartheid in place in Afghanistan, and that is part of the system of human rights violations that we're seeing. So the motion, it highlights this system of gender apartheid as well as violence against minorities, attacks on freedom of the press, the targeting of those that have been involved in Afghan national security and defense forces, those that were involved in supporting Canada. These were victims of Taliban. These are victims of Taliban violence. Now many of these groups were victims of Taliban violence during the initial period of Taliban control of Afghanistan. And it was with this in mind, as well as the threats to our own security, that Canada stepped up and joined our allies in fighting to rid Afghanistan of the Taliban and to give Afghanistan, to support the Afghan people in realizing their desire for freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law. And many Canadians participated heroically in that effort. I believe that the pullout of Afghanistan was a big mistake, and that it would have been better for Western troops to be able to continue to play a supportive role as Afghans were heroically fighting the Taliban. The pullout was poorly managed, poorly executed, and it really was done in a way that gave the Taliban the greatest opportunity to be able to take over the country. But in the midst of what we know, the sad reality that the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan, I think it's crucial for this House, for us here, and for the Canadian people to remain engaged with events in Afghanistan, to honor the sacrifices that have been made and the ongoing desire of the Afghan people for change in their country. There are many Afghan civil society groups, opposition groups, pro-democracy groups, and diaspora groups here in Canada that are working to envision and to plan for a brighter future for Afghanistan. And the Foreign Affairs Committee recently heard testimony from a representative of the National Resistance Front who said that clearly Taliban rule in Afghanistan is not working. It's causing all sorts of problems, including a humanitarian crisis. And that, in his view, it's realistic to hope for a kind of collapse of the Taliban administration that would open the door again for a new kind of alternative Afghan government that aligns more with the hopes and the values of the people of that country, as well as what we would hope for here in Canada. So we should be continuing to engage, to support the opposition, and to tighten sanctions against the Taliban oppressors of the Afghan people. It is not a lost cause, far from it. There are many reasons to hope that a brighter future is ahead, but Afghanistan's friends around the world must continue to be engaged in that hope, and that means firmly holding the line against the Taliban and preserving their terrorist listing and looking for opportunities, if anything, to tighten the sanctions that apply to the Taliban. That is our position, and I hope this is a position that is shared by the House. Finally, I just want to say on immigration measures as well. Canada had and continues to have an obligation to support those who stood with Canada, who fought with Canada, as well as the most vulnerable minority communities, to support their ability to make application and come to Canada. Sadly, this government was far behind on making that happen. We had been calling for measures in the lead up to the fall of Kabul In fact, on the day Kabul fell, this Prime Minister should have been at his desk, but he was instead at the Governor General's calling an election. And it's a shame that the government wasn't more focused on responding to events in Afghanistan instead of making political calculations about their own political future. But Conservatives, this whole House, we believe, should stand with people of Afghanistan and seek that brighter democratic future.